what do you think defines somebody that's kind of like meant for this space, if that makes sense?
You know, the people who I thought were really successful or really thrived in the environmental science space, I really enjoyed it, I think were the people who are willing to ask questions, ask the right questions. And that might sound really stereotypical, but because it is very broad, you need to find where you fit in that space and the linkages between all the spaces, for example.
Today's guest is Mikey Dyer, who studied a Bachelor of Environmental Science at the University of South Australia. I've known Michael for many years. And interestingly, Michael, before you finished your undergraduate degree, you didn't even have a passport. And yet, now your work has led you not only all over the Pacific, but all around the world. So that's quite a difference from maybe where you thought you'd end up. Tell me about one of those adventures traveling around the Pacific.
Yeah, no worries. So that's right, Rob. In the final year of my undergraduate degree, I did not have a passport, and I had no real vision of actually seeing where my career would go. I wasn't even thinking about studying anything related to overseas or international travel or the Pacific whatsoever. But right now, nearly 10 years after graduating, I'm a senior manager at the NACAO program, and for the last couple of years, I've been helping manage and coordinate the development of high integrity, human rights based carbon projects in rural Pacific areas, so in Pacific Islands. So I've been managing a development of a carbon project in the Choisel, the Solomon Islands, which is Choisel province in the Western Solomon Islands, right next to Papua New Guinea. I've travelled there 6 times the last 18 months or so. And to put that into perspective, from Adelaide, my hometown, that's a flight to Brisbane and then to Honiara, then 2 flights to Choisel, and an hour or so boat ride each way. And one of the amazing stories I have from that, regular adventure, every time I've gone this part of the world has absolutely blown me away and left me speechless and humbled with its environmental qualities. So I was cruising down the coast of Choisel in a boat, heading towards this small settlement called Sasamunga. And, we're going across sandstone cliffs. We're surrounded by coral reefs and natural beauty, tropical forest. No phone reception. The internet only arrived there in 2019. So we have walkie-talkies and radios and things like that for safety purposes. So it's pretty remote. And one particular day we were cruising along, and the guy running the boat, who's a guy I work with, he goes, "Oh, Mikey, there's a dugong." And we saw this dugong pull up next to the boat. And I was blown away. I'd never seen one before. And then all of a sudden, I'm not that interested in the dugong anymore. I thought that was a quick change in interest. And he pointed ahead and he goes, "Oh, look." And there was this big spiral of birds going around in circles, some seabirds up ahead, about a couple hundred meters ahead of us. And we were on the way to work. And I'm like, wow, look at that. And then a tuna pops out next to the boat, about the size of my torso. And I've never even seen a fish that big at this point. And all of a sudden, birds go ballistic and they start diving in the water. And then there's tuna all hopping up around us, absolutely everywhere, thousands of them. Then there was dolphins, and so the birds are hitting the tuna are hitting some other level of bait fish, the dolphins are hitting the tuna, and it's just this David Attenborough style documentary occurrence event happening all around us. And we're on our way to work, and all of us, no one was interested in going to work that day.
That sounds like just about the best commute that somebody could hope for if you're interested in the environmental sciences.
And then all of a sudden, we all basically stopped and decided to get amongst it and go fishing. We didn't really have to try very hard. You could just sort of grab the tuna and throw it in the boat at that point. And it was mind-blowing, just to be a part of such a pristine environment and such a wild, natural event. If you were to say that to a young environmental science student, "Hey, this is what's going to happen on your commute to work," people would jump on board, I imagine. But it was an absolutely mind-blowing experience, and I've had lots of experiences very similar since.
So it seems like you would never have imagined, that would be your daily life, if that makes sense. Do you remember why you chose environmental science to begin with? What led you there?
Yeah, I have a distinct memory. When I first, finished high school and was looking at studying, higher education, I was actually studied in mechanical engineering or environmental engineering. At that point in time, I was really interested in sustainability science, problem solving, that sort of thinking. I did my best at the first year of mechanical engineering, but I really lost interest. I really struggled to be motivated to work and to put my effort in. I passed all my courses, and then I really enjoy the math. I really enjoy the science part, but I don't really see like how I'm contributing to some of like the global problems that we were learning about. I couldn't really put two and two together and see how I fit in the picture. So I just completed a first year of mechanical engineering, and I went to like one of those uni services, career services, and I just started looking at different degrees that were, you could apply perhaps a credit to, but really had like a lot of scientific thinking, but like shaped by, I guess you could say, philosophical thinking around like different philosophical thinking around problem solving. And I came across like environmental science, and it actually had like a lot of geospatial science to it, which is a big part of my career now. But I was looking at it and going, oh, wow, this is a different sort of degree. And they had lots of perks to it that I thought was interesting. Well, I thought were perks. There's lots of parts of the degree that were really interesting. So like, I thought it had a lot of like human side of like culture and sustainability, environmental conflict or conflict negotiations. And my understanding from like engineering was that, these people are not particularly interested in understanding how a problem works. It's about like, how do we starting problem from the top up? And environmental science had a different approach. So, and some of the other perks were like, there was lots of field work and there was lots of opportunity to spend time in the bush, or it seems like they had a great network of people who are willing to take on, young, interested people to participate in a lot of research projects. And I found a lot of that really, really fascinating. With a bit of career guidance from the university, I picked environmental science because of my strength in mathematics and then the ability to apply it in a different way of thinking at the time, so that more on the forefront of sustainability science rather than a mechanical problem solving.
Knowing what you know now, who would be really well suited to environment? And environmental science is so broad. Maybe let's start there. Environmental science is so broad. Can you talk a little bit to that? Like, given your experience, the variety of roles that you've seen people working in.
Yeah. I mean, environmental science is exceptionally broad. It is a degree or topic that I find very hard to define or to give guidance on. But, what I've seen is there's a lot, like the way I would like to frame it is actually no matter where you work, so whether that would be like, or where you're intending to work or you're looking at society, like there's a role for environmental scientists because, environmental science interacts with like land use planning. So like in your degree, you'll touch on like a lot of land use planning. Environmental science touches on like policy. So, like all the environmental policy work that you might have at the planning level or the state government or federal government, or, there's a very big emphasis on national parks or parks management or environmental asset management. And that's a very big stream. So a lot of people intend to go down that pathway, So
because they love the nature or they love animals and things like that.
Yeah, like they love nature, they love animals, they perhaps are really fond of hiking and things along those lines. They have a lot of outdoor hobbies and they want to help provide access to people and help people experience outdoors. So, a lot of my friends from university or people I've interacted with have been park rangers, are park rangers or have been at some point. And then on top of that, there's a lot of environmental management that comes with that. So, firefighting, firefighters, fire management, coastal management, sand dune management. A lot of jobs come up in those areas, and that might be with like state government, Department of Environment or Department of National Parks or, local government, things like that. So there's lots of pathways there. But the thing that I found really interesting when studying, and what probably one of the areas that drew me to environmental science and has been a huge asset is like there's this huge intersection of environmental economics and spatial sciences. So, like every single piece of information these days, whether you're talking about AI or just like walking down to the shops and your receipt, it all is tracked spatially. Absolutely everything spatial. And it's all big data. So you're talking about like big data, AI, all these things. All this data has a spatial relevance to it, which means it interacts with the environment. So a lot of environmental science, there was a lot of opportunity to study spatial sciences as a connection. And there's a lot of employment in this space, whether that remains in the environmental sector or other sectors. And I found this exceptionally fascinating, being able to look at satellite imagery and see the impacts of a fire or the potential impacts of climate change, or to look at like, cyclones, weather mapping, disaster fronts, all these sort of things, or being able to see age demographics across a state and be able to plan for infrastructure in a sustainable way. A lot of this work was being done or was taught in environmental science. And at the time, when thinking of my degree, I had absolutely no understanding of power of these tools and how relevant one it would be to my career, but actually how much in demand it is. So at the time, there was 200 engineering students, just for a bit of context. Environmental science had 40 students in the first year, I believe. And I think 11 students were in the spatial sciences. And all 11 of those students had jobs in the sector before they graduated. Not that that's, I don't think employment is something that is super important, but shouldn't define your choice. But it is a big factor, right? And if you can be employed in something that's super fascinating and super interesting, I think it's really relevant. So there's like a very large spatial stream in the environmental and earth sciences, which often isn't talked about at all, actually. And, I had no understanding of it at high school and didn't even know it was a sector.
So what I'm hearing from you is that like environmental sciences as a whole is incredibly broad and diverse. Everything from, working in the outdoors, so field work on the ground, national parks, working with animals, right through to in an office working on policy level settings and working on problems, how to solve problems, and then a whole range of different organizations. I mean, from government through to non-government organizations, so NGOs, charities, all the way through to private enterprise. And across all of those organizations and all of those different fields, those core skills that you gain from an environmental science degree are still applicable. So that said, it being so diverse, what do you think are the core characteristics of somebody that's kind of well suited to this field? Because it's so broad, but right at the core, what do you think defines somebody that's kind of like meant for this space, if that makes sense?
The people who I thought were really successful or really thrived in the environmental science space, I really enjoyed it, I think, were the people who are willing to ask questions, ask the right questions. And that might sound like really stereotypical, but because it is very broad, you need to find where you fit in that space and the linkages between all the spaces, for example. And to not necessarily to see the importance of where all these perhaps topics intersect. So, for example, I found, there were some people who were really keen to work with animals, and that was their mantra. That was what they really wanted to do. And, perhaps they struggled because you're in a environmental policy or international policy class and you're thinking about mammals or birds or something along those lines and not necessarily see how they intersect with the importance of those things. I think the other, being able to ask questions really was important, and trying to see where there is value in the unknown, but also grassroots activities, or there's this phrase I've heard thrown around a lot. It's thinking global, acting local. I think people who act like that or, see the value in that level of thinking or participating in their community really thrive. There's some other areas, I would say values in general. I think being adventurous helps because you may need to move for employment or you're not necessarily sure where you're going to end up. So having a sense of adventure, being able to be relatively uncomfortable necessarily, you may find some parts particularly challenging. So, working in very challenging conditions, where that environmental conditions. But generally being a problem solver, I think, is very, very valuable. I found there was some real core, the people who were really successful had some very strong analytical skills. So, mathematics, and statistics as well, and probably the ability to, these days, to code and, do software development, that will take you very, very far in the environmental science field, take you very far in a lot of fields actually. But those, if you have a few what I call tools in your toolbox or strings in your bow that you don't necessarily know how they fit, but you have that ability to problem solve, you're pretty adaptable, you see the value in participating in a lot of community activities and don't necessarily see how things, or see the value in how things intersect, I think that's really important. So for example, I went to one of those uni education days where the students might stand at a booth and prospect students might come in and ask about the degree, right? Yeah, one of these career days or uni days. And this father and daughter came and I was standing at the booth and they were oh, tell us about environmental science. And the young girl, she was really bright. She seemed really excited. And she said to me, she wanted to work with animals. And I sort of said well, maybe you should study an animal, I know some universities have like animal behavior degrees or like a veterinary degree or probably like a Bachelor of Science majoring in biology. Environmental science is a little bit different. And a student standing next to me sort of disagreed and said, oh, we do lots of bird watching and, we get to like use birds as a metric for environmental health. And the young girl was like, oh, that doesn't seem like that exciting. And I was like, yeah, well, it is like a 4 a.m. start and you are standing in like some place you might be very, very not comfortable in or very remote, right? And at the time I was doing a lot of bird watching, not for fun, for work. And I sort of thought about it in some respects. Perhaps it wasn't so right for that individual. She was quite set on what she wanted to do, and that's very good. But there was a couple of guys who did this bird watching stuff, and they're policy analysts now in international development and international sectors, because Australia has a whole bunch of international agreements about bird migratory pathways between Korea, China and Japan. And like you're talking about guys who they're probably doing bird watching at 4 a.m. in gumboots, absolutely terrible conditions. It's raining, it's muddy, they're miserable, no coffee, all the things that, and now they're sitting in like an international office at like the Green Climate Fund or DFAT negotiating some of these agreements. And I feel like that's where like, you can't explain that to someone who says, I want to work with animals or I want to work in international policy. But they participated in something at a community level event and it's gone all the way up into this, this policy space. And I think that's the potential of environmental science.
I completely agree with you. Interesting. So my first degree was an environmental science degree as well. I remember seeing in a second year uni class on tropical cyclones and just loving it, like just the mechanics of tropical cyclones and crazy weather and how powerful it all is. And I remember this moment, it sort of struck me that I went, oh my God, I could actually work in this space. I could study nothing but tropical cyclones if that's what I wanted to do. And in fact, because it is so broad, I sort of stepped into uni wanting to do environmental science because I love the outdoors. I wanted to do the right thing, in the world. And then all of these other pathways became obvious as I went through. And so I completely agree with that sort of analysis, that as you go through an environmental science degree and you discover soils, geospatial, God, keep going, biology, animals, you name it, that those areas will grab your attention. And as you get drawn into those areas, then the opportunities within those open up, like you've said, like the policy area or project management or hands-on management, community management. These things all open up. So I think the message there is like, don't put too much pressure on yourself if you're thinking about going into it, of thinking that you can know exactly where you're going to end up. Like maybe you're one of those rare people that does know, but I think most people probably figure that out as they go through their degree. Does that sound accurate, given the people that you've met and the people you know?
Yeah, exactly. Very accurate.
G'day, it's Rob here. Hey, are you a parent or a carer of a student that's thinking of going to uni in the years ahead? Did you know that Choosing Your Uni has a whole bunch of resources that are just for people like you? And you can find those at parents.choosingyouruni.com. You're going to find things like links to our Facebook community, downloadable worksheets, and heaps of advice by parents for parents. It's all the sort of stuff that you need to help guide your student on their journey to uni and beyond. Check it out now, parents.choosingyouruni.com.
And you've met some interesting people as part of this work, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, I've met some very interesting people and had some very unique experiences over the course of the last, 5 to 10 years, and exceptionally. Yeah, like my most recent activity I've been working on outside of work. So the last few years, actually, I'll bring it back. The last few years, I've been involved in this program called the Young Pacific Leaders Program. Australia is able to participate. And the reason why I've been participating is I've been really interested in redefining Australia's role in the Pacific from a youth perspective and improving that relationship. Essentially, how to demonstrate how to be an Australian Pacific leader, or how an Australian person working in the Pacific context, how they should lead and behave. And, with being rooted in a sense of like humility, service and Pacific values as opposed to more Western values. And this little idea that I've had has taken me all over the Pacific outside of work, aside from where I normally travel with work. It's been really, really amazing. And so a part of this program, I had an opportunity to apply for a fellowship, an economic empowerment fellowship at the East West Centre, which headquarters is in Honolulu, Hawaii. Australians have only been allowed to apply for the 2023-2024 cohort was the first time. And I applied, and you had to, talk about your career, talk about your ideologies, what you wanted to get out of it, all these sort of things, and what you were going to do if you applied, like what impact you're going to make long term, And yeah, so I was successful in my application, and I got to go stay in Hawaii for 6 weeks with the East-West Center, and then a week in Washington, D.C. afterwards. And when I participate in these activities, like over the course of my career, like, I've done a few of these things, or it might be like a 1-week program, and now I'm getting way bigger professional development things. I really try to absorb everything and really try to make the most of it and link it to where I can find connections with the other cohort, And so there was only 10 participants, and there was roughly about 400 applicants. Interestingly, I was the only applicant from Australia. So when I found that out, I was like, wow, people should know about this opportunity. And so one of the activities I was doing to sort of reflect each day or try to bring it in, I was going for a walk each night with this guy from Papua New Guinea. And he was the CEO of Pacific Fund, big investment firm in Papua New Guinea. And if you look at our careers or our trajectories, we're chalk and cheese. It's all about investment, finance, banking, and I'm environmental policy, human rights, climate finance. So, very, very different. Each night we were walking together and just sharing what we learned in the day, how we thought we could apply it to our community and what we thought we could do. And on this particular night, we were walking around Washington, D.C., and we were sort of in awe and reflecting on the legacy of some of the monuments there and the words that are inscribed in stone, right? And we're just talking, and we're hanging outside the Abraham Lincoln Memorial, and there must be a couple hundred people there. It's a big space, and across the monument, there's these guys from Papua New Guinea, and there's just 2 of us there. It's getting dark, it's freezing cold, and there's about 10 guys from Papua New Guinea, and they're looking at us, and we're looking at them, and we had dressed formally all day, but for this night walk, we've put beanies on and hoodies, and we just looked like 2 guys trying to stay warm. And we say hello in Pidgin, but the guy says hello in Pidgin, and all the guys in Papua New Guinea across the hall, they're sort of looking at us, be like, who are these? They obviously know us, or there's some interaction, there's some acknowledgement of who's who here, but it was a bit odd. It was very, happenstance. We walk over to each other, we shake hands, everyone's taking photos and talking. It turns out it was the Deputy Prime Minister and the Environmental Minister and the Police Minister for Papua New Guinea at the time. Or they're still current now. And so they were like, whoa, and we were just talking, and my colleague Des introduced me. He goes, this is Mikey. He's a specialist in climate finance. And he really propped me up as this big figure in the sector. And I personally don't necessarily think that's the case, but thank you, Des, for the kudos there. And so the Environment Minister of Papua New Guinea, he was really blown away, and he started speaking to me in Pidgin, and I've been fortunate enough to take some lessons, so I replied in Pidgin. And he was like, okay, here's my WhatsApp number. I'm going to message you later. Next time you're in Papua New Guinea, you're going to have dinner with me. And I was just like, wow. And I took the guy's WhatsApp. I was a bit shocked. Des pulled me aside and said, let's wait 24 hours. We'll message him, and then we'll follow up, and we'll go have dinner with him next time you're in town. And I've had numerous experiences like this actually over the last 5 years. And the New Colombo Plan Scholarship sort of helped that in the beginning, or helped me see the potential of some of these opportunities.
Mention what that is, the NCP?
The New Colombo Plan Scholarship is a Department of Foreign Affairs Australia funded scholarship for undergraduate students who are interested in studying in the Indo-Pacific more broadly. I wouldn't necessarily say it's not specific to Indo-Pacific affairs, but it's very linked. And it's about essentially creating the next generation of Australian students or Australian professionals, longer term thinking, who are focused on the Indo-Pacific and having more awareness of the space Australia operates in. Australia's nearest neighbours, our biggest trading partners, our communities and societies that are perhaps the most culturally similar to us, but we don't necessarily know that they're right on our doorstep. And that's what it's about. It's funded by Department of Foreign Affairs, and it's open, I think, from second year students right the way through to the end of your degree. And actually, this might be I always think this is a funny point, but Rob was on my interview, you were on my interview panel.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, so that. So you've probably seen how I came in and to where I'm at now. a very interesting trajectory.
It's really cool, Mikey, because, that was a long time ago. It's almost 10 years ago. But
Yeah, 10 years.
And as our conversation has gone here, I get that feeling, just doors open, right? And nobody knows what door's going to open for them when you're a teenager. For you, like NCP, the new Colombo plan, the door opened and you went, okay, that looks interesting. And you walked through that. And then you've ended up in, this sort of specific area and out in the Pacific, and doors are opening there. And then suddenly the door opens and it's a minister from another country, and suddenly you're in contact with someone over there. So this is, I think, one of the things that people maybe don't realize when they're a teenager, is that that's kind of how it works.
Totally.
So, like, you don't know what door's going to open for you. So the main thing, and you've said it earlier in the conversation, is like, just be curious.
Yeah.
And when those opportunities open, have a look at it and be like, is this me or is this not me? And then you can make your choice at that point. Nothing is predetermined, if that makes sense.
Totally. It makes a lot of sense. I think like my biggest strength from environmental science, or how environmental science worked for me, was two things. I always ask questions. So like someone asked this really crazy question to me just before I applied for NCP at the time, but it doesn't have much to do with my degree. But this guy just said to me, his name's Tim Lowe, is an Australian author, and he said, Mikey, could you imagine cricket without grass? I said, no, not really. And I said, like, and he's like, well, he said he can't imagine civilization without grass. It's not. He had this whole book on it essentially, and bamboo, and like the most common word in many Asian languages is centered around bamboo. There happens to be a grass, rice is a grass, and so on. And I was like, wow, man, that's a very big picture. I've never really seen that image before. And he was like, ask questions. Just ask questions. Right. So I always asked questions. What's the better way? How does this link? So, at NCP, I wrote my honours thesis, or the fourth year of my degree, on a tropical palm tree in Fiji, and how it was damaging rainforests, changing the way rainforest dynamics and growth works in a detrimental way. And I was like, well, how does that link to like broader society? And what I said in my interview, I can always remember it, because I was always asking questions. And this guy asked me the grass question, and then the question in the interview was just like, well, how would you convince this to the Australian taxpayer? Roughly at the time, Tony Abbott made a point in the media saying that, most of Australia's aid money was going to conservation activities, and he gave a figure. I remember that figure, and I said it in my interview, and I said, so here's the question. Why wouldn't you pay me to contribute to the solution rather than paying for the problem later? And then I think that went really well. People, well, this guy, who really cares about this palm tree, to be honest? But in the sense of like, he's seeing how it links, how it's being used, taxpayer funding is being used, how it's going to have an economic impact down the line. And that really framed like that 12 months of my life, like really thinking about how this links. So I was linking it to like water problems, community problems, agricultural problems, this thing's becoming a bit of a pest. And now in that sector, there's like hundreds of millions of funding going into that sector, right? I was like, wow. But that led me down to a different path. It was like, actually, I lost a bit of interest in that space, but I thought, wow, like there's got to be a better way to value our environment, this environmental economic system, and put that into planning, not just a holistic sort of ideology change, but actually how do we use some of this quantitative information? Who's doing this? Who's putting this into space, like, into practice? And at the time, I was working at UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, and someone said, here is a couple $1 million in a budget. Someone has to do an economic analysis of this rainforest and to see how it's supporting or reducing disaster risk in Samoa, disasters from cyclones. And so we showed that at the time that there was probably going to be no forest left within a 10-year period because of the deforestation being caused by land clearing. And this was having a huge impact on GDP, absolutely astronomical. All of Samoa's GDP was like 50% to sometimes 200% of the GDP was being wiped out in 2 or 3 days in one catchment. And so we were like, whoa, like this is a huge problem. And so I thought like, there's got to be a better way of doing this, using this information to inform planning or environmental planning, land use planning, disaster risk planning. And at the time, I was asking this question of everyone, someone like yourself, Rob, anyone in the office, anyone I met at a meeting. I was like, this is my new question. I I'm not interested in doing a PhD or anything like that at the time. But I was like, this is the question: who is using this quantitative information into environmental planning? And a Fijian friend of mine said, "Oh, there's one guy doing this. You should call him up." And so I did. I called him. I said, "Oh, I'm going to call him up," and I called him up. And 2 years later, he offered me a job. He was just like, "You want a job, mate? Like, I'm trying to turn my business and scale it from a 1-country program to a 3-country program to a 9-country program. Do you want to be a part of that?" And I thought, in the beginning, I said no. I was like, "Oh, no, no." And then he called me up 6 months later and he said, "Mate, do you want it?" And I jumped. I said, "Yeah, this is going to be great." I quit working at UNDP and I moved to the private sector. But that was the success. Always asking the question, what's the next question for me? How does it link to my work? How does it link to what other people are doing? The other thing that made me successful in the environmental science space was saying yes to things that I didn't necessarily think I would say yes to. I was a nerd at school. I was really interested in reading books, doing math. I did math after work. Like I was embedded in it. And that really probably restricted my my scope, right? NCP really taught me to say yes. There was someone I can't really remember, but there was someone at one of the guest speakers in the pre-departure that was like, say yes to things. I like to say the term now, your network is your net worth. And like, I've said yes to things that I never would have said yes to before. Like, for example, I took up boxing for a while, and I met like the director of IUCN at a boxing match, and like, we shook hands and just had a bit of a conversation that's led to some work employment. If you said to me, like in year 12, "Hey mate, would you be interested in boxing?" Mate, absolutely not. I played cricket in an Australian Samoan cricket team. I never ever played cricket in my life. So I somehow became the vice captain just from rocking up every week. And I met all the DFAT staff through that. Now when I travel through Canberra, I hang out with their families and have breakfast. Like that's just the sort of stuff I've said yes to that has shaped my participation in the larger community. And I think it's really important to say yes to things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. We can be very focused on the academic path. We can be very focused on the accolades, perhaps like the distinctions or the high distinctions or the scholarships and all those things that have a lot of importance and do give us a lot of meaning. But where we sit in the community, the larger community, I think is just as important. How we participate, what we say yes to, is just as important. And some of the things I've done outside of where I've launched 2 of my own social programs, that had funding and now been adopted by other NGOs. And that was me just saying yes to having a conversation, essentially. Like, would you come over and have a cup of tea? And I thought, yeah, okay, I'll come over. Let's have a chat. I think you have to say yes, whether that's to sport or hanging out with someone, yes to your mates, listening to their idea, volunteering a little bit of your time in the community or volunteering a lot of your time in the community, saying yes to something. You actually never know where it's going to go. Those 2 strengths of being able to say yes and always ask the right questions or always asking the next question, it'll take you very far in environmental science and probably any career trajectory, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Just having that curiosity. And I think people who end up in the environmental sciences are genuinely curious because the natural world is a very complex, unknowable thing to some extent. So you got to be curious about those elements that grab your attention. And then, as you've said, finding those problems that you want to solve between those 2 things, and keeping an eye out for opportunity and saying yes to opportunities. It can lead you in quite remarkable directions, as it clearly has for you. So what's next for you, mate? Like, what's coming up next on this incredible adventure?
Yeah, the next incredible adventure. Well, I'm heading to Papua New Guinea next week. I'm leading the NACAL program's strategy for Papua New Guinea at the moment. So we're designing that. So I'll be traveling to Papua New Guinea and Fiji a lot over the next 12 months. Outside of work, with my East-West Centre Fellowship, I'm trying to launch a transparency mechanism for climate finance and carbon market development in Papua New Guinea. And as a trial, I would like it to be Pacific-wide, trying to do that outside of work, getting a lot of traction in that space. So the Rainforest Fund and Transparency International have just launched something very similar. I'm from Washington, DC, and I've been chatting to them about parallels with my idea. It's a little bit different, but to see if there's a way that perhaps they could adopt my idea. And so that's probably the next 12 months. So I'm very focused on those 2 things in my workplace and outside of work. So I'm very interested in the next question for me is the carbon market and carbon offsets and all those things are gaining a lot of traction in Australia and globally. And I really want to know, well, how do we do this in a high integrity setting? People use that term a lot, but like, how do we do that with a human rights based approach or a customary landowners approach, how do we do it in a way to make sure that the people who are on the forefront or in the highest risk of impacts on climate change have equitable participation in the market and receive the most benefit. So I'm trying to build tools and systems around that. So that will be my next 12 months or so, I believe, leading some of my Nical's work in Papua New Guinea and trying to build my own platform on the side.
Awesome, mate. Great to chat with you, Mikey. Thanks for joining me on Choosing Your Uni.
Thanks for the opportunity.
At Choosing Your Uni, our mission is to make finding your ideal institution and your degree fun, easy and stress-free. So if you're looking to save some time, to discover more and to get personalised advice for every step of your journey, check out choosingyouruni.com. Our theme music is composed by Pasha Shogi and his band Flow, and this episode has been researched and constructed on Gadigal land in Sydney. Until next time, have yourself an awesome day.